Hello, hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 2 of season 4 of Black Writers Read. My name is Nicole Young Martin, and I serve as your host and producer and founder of this podcast. Fall is upon us. As you can tell, I'm wearing a sweater, which those of you who know me very well, sweater weather is my thing. Here in Northern Connecticut, it's 68 degrees. I woke up this morning to a very nice, crisp, refreshing, cool breeze in my window. So it is nice, possibly because New England weather changes in a breath and a heartbeat. No longer have to sweat constantly by just existing. I hope that the weather where you are is as comfortable where I am here. Let's go ahead and get today's conversation started. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind the scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during the summer of 2020, we've hosted over 50 authors representing 10 plus genres from 4 countries and 13 states. Today, we welcome Aaron Dworkin. Named a 2005 MacArthur Fellow, the MacArthur Genius Grant, President Obama's first appointment to the National Council on the Arts and member of President Biden's Arts Policy Committee, Aaron P. Dworkin is former dean and current professor of arts leadership and entrepreneurship at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance, my undergraduate alma mater. Aaron is a best-selling writer and poet-journalist, having authored his poetry collection, They Said I Wasn't Really Black, along with 4 other books, including his memoir, Uncommon Rhythm, A Black, White, Jewish, Jehovah's Witness, Irish Catholic, Adoptee's Journey to Leadership, and The Entrepreneurial Artist, Lessons from Highly Successful Creatives. Aaron originated the terminology poetjournalism, which he defines as journalism in which a news story or other event is presented in poetic form, incorporating elements of emotion, opinion, and creative illustration. He serves as the poet in residence of the City of Ann Arbor's Bicentennial, the Rodham Institute, Fisher Foundation, Wright Museum of African American History, Complexions Contemporary Ballet, Grantmakers in the Arts, Ovation TV, and Shar Music. He has been featured on The Today Show, NBC Nightly News, CNN, Jet Magazine, and named one of Newsweek's 15 people who make America great. His Emmy Award-winning film, An American Prophecy, was honored by numerous festivals, while his digital art project, Fractured History, has exhibited to rave reviews. Aaron is also a leading social entrepreneur, having founded the globally recognized Sphinx organization, the leading arts organization with the mission of transforming lives through the power of diversity in the arts. He also serves as the host of the nationally broadcast Arts Engines show with a viewership of over 100,000. A sought-after global thought leader and a passionate advocate for diversity and inclusion, excellence in arts education, entrepreneurship and leadership, as well as inclusion in the performing arts. Aaron is a frequent keynote speaker and lecturer at numerous universities and global arts, creativity, technology conferences, and is on the roster of the prestigious APB Speakers Bureau, having raised over $15 million for and I work in this field and I can't pronounce it today. Philanthropic causes. Aaron personifies creative leadership, entrepreneurship, and community service with an unwavering passion for the arts, diversity, and their role in society. This is only just a portion of Aaron's accomplishments. To read his full bio and learn more about his other work, please visit his website at www.aarondworkin.com. I'm so excited to finally add my home state of Michigan on the Black Writers Read and to welcome a fellow Michigan Wolverine. Honestly, I've wanted to chat with Aaron about his writing for quite some time. I've had the blessing of working for the Sphinx organization's annual competition for several years in its early years. So it is definitely an honor and privilege to speak with him one-on-one today, and giving him dozens of flowers as well for changing and evolving the arts, classical music, and how we engage with audiences. If you have a chance, please look up the Sphinx organization, whose work demonstrates how he has left and only begun to leave his legacy. For those who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format of our show. Aaron will read an excerpt from his work, then we'll chat about his work and writing career, If time remains at the end of the conversation, we'll open it up to Q&A with those who are joining us. We have viewers joining us today from both Facebook and YouTube. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comment section on the platform where you're joining us from today. I will compile the questions and either pose them to our guests following our conversation or insert them during an appropriate time within our chat. Today, we're going to be talking about this book, The Poetjournalist, which I'm very excited about. So now I'd like to bring Aaron on to the virtual stage. Good morning.
Good morning, Nicole. It is so great to be able to join you.
I am so excited to chat with you this morning, and thank you for being here.
Absolutely. No, trust me, it is my honor. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so the stage is yours.
Great. So I thought I would just kick things off by sharing the title poem from my latest collection, which is entitled The Poetjournalist. I am the multicolored tubes looping down the wall, darting around outlets colored red and yellow, snaking into veins of the elderly woman, gasping from within the sheets of her COVID bed, anchored by technology to the protocols of strangers, dedicated to prolong the life she faces without the grip on her lover's wrist. I am the passive man in straight black pants with my untucked white shirt facing the column of tanks as their turrets salute my defiance in Tiananmen Square before my movement falters, showcasing my human right to exist, my freedom to persist. I am the failed bank filled with the empty paper and promises of people's dreams, chosen for their inability to pay, like the stray gazelle on the savannah as the lion poaches their prey in the early morning mist. I am the Twin Towers twisted metal, exploding into crimson blossoms, fading into black entrails and futures lost, shading the horizon of our lives like the passions of lovers before they fall into disarray and forget what sparked their rise and hatred of their demise and events regretted yet still reminisced. I am the 9 minutes and 29 seconds that a black man donning a black tank top felt the knee of dispassionate authority on his full-throated neck before his life with voice was ground into silence that was heard and shook the sugar maple trees of Richmond, Virginia, and broke the blue wall more than any Apro pick with fist. I am the grist for bottled water office talk. I assist the memory to feel the moments lost. I am the emotion of every story missed. I am the words the newsprint failed to list. I am our soul we must enlist. I am the poet journalist.
Thank you so much for reading the very first poem of the book. It's such a great way to start today's conversation. So, can you talk, because you shared a little bit here in the poem, can you talk a little bit more about what inspired this particular turn in your career and in your writing? And specifically, because I know you've been writing for some time, when did you receive the calling to write from this perspective?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I've written my whole life, obviously not necessarily in a professional way. And I remember, I mean, as a child, I just read constantly. We didn't have a TV growing up, so I just read books constantly. And so that led to writing. And actually, while I was at Michigan, is when I initially felt a need to express the things that I had been experiencing in life. Obviously, I wasn't thinking of journalism or anything like that. I just felt the need to express. And it came from an experience I had visiting one of my friend's houses and with his parents who were in an interracial marriage, and thinking about my own background as a Black, white, Jewish, Irish, Catholic, Jehovah's Witness adoptee. And what it inspired me to do was to write the title poem for my original collection, my inaugural collection of poetry, which was entitled "They Said I Wasn't Really Black," and reflecting some of the experiences I had in middle school and then high school. And I found it, I wasn't writing for anything. I had no plans to do a collection of poetry. I certainly didn't think I was a poet at all. And but it was cathartic. And even though I was a trained violinist since the age of 5, the ability to kind of capture in words some of those things I was experiencing was very empowering for me. And so I decided to kind of go on that journey. And that led to my first collection, but also then combining words, text with music, since I was so embedded in music. So then most of my career, I was doing what I refer to as musicry and combining poetry with classical music. And performing that, creating different works, performed with a number of orchestras, and did a host of different things, did chamber music settings. And then now, over about 1.5 years ago, going on 2 years ago, I kind of hit this additional epiphany as I was thinking about developing poetry for another collection. And as I was thinking about it, I was trying to get a sense of what was I trying to do with my poetry. And as I was thinking about it, and I had written a couple poems about certain current events. I wrote a poem about the invasion into Ukraine. And I somehow, in the midst of that, was like, well, what I really want to do is capture not just these personal stories of mine, but these events that surround us. And I was like a journalist, and I'm like a journalist. I'm like a poet journalist, right? Like literally it just was. And I was like, poet journalist. And I was like, well, I'm sure that's a thing. So I Googled it, and it turned out it wasn't the thing. And there was history of some aspects of people using text in these ways, but literally no one had just used that term. And it was literally so, which is why now if you go to poetjournalist.com, it will take you to my website. And so I was like, okay, so if I am going to do this, what does that really mean? And that led to defining it, and then led to a kind of help from me to think about the structure. What types of poems did I want to do? And so that is what then evolved into this wonderful journey that I've been experiencing.
Yes, I absolutely love the narrative created within just the chapter titles of your poetry collection, this book that we're talking about today. It includes titles like Setting the Stage, On Inequality, On the Black Experience, On My Identity, On the Arts, and Encores. That is literally the journey that you take us on. Can you share with us how this poetry collection was curated, specifically how were poems chosen to be included, and then how the narrative evolves from on equality to encores? And lastly, why talk about on inequality before your own personal journey?
Yeah. So what it's actually interesting that I didn't originate the development of the collection by the themes and categories. Um, I knew I wanted to capture a host of things. Certainly for me, everything that I've done in life, whether it is my children's book, whether it is my science fiction novel, whether it is my work with Sphinx, whatever it is that I've done, any of my creative pursuits, they always incorporate in some way diversity, because that is who I am. And both biologically and spiritually and emotionally. So those threads and all of the things that inform that experience of mine, being biracial, fuel many things. So having poems that are informed by the Black experience, having poems that are informed by experiencing and or observing inequality, are critically important to me and just part of me. So that was kind of one part that just certainly I was going to look at that, and I was going to try and look and kind of capture some of those aspects. Also, in developing this kind of role as a poet journalist, I was thinking that what I didn't want to do was to write a collection of poetry and then kind of put it out and have, maybe if I was lucky, a few hundred, academics read it and, kind of maybe thoughtfully and academically comment on it. And that would be it. I wanted to hopefully move people and reach people and experience them and in some way inform, enrich their lives with this exploration that I was going on. And so as I thought about that, I was like, with so many things that I've done as an entrepreneur and as a social entrepreneur, they're all based in partnership. And so I was like, instead of thinking, oh, I want to be a poet journalist, I want to write and capture these moments and experiences and thoughts and kind of contemplations of life and challenges that surround us. It was like, what if it's we? And are there institutions out there that share my passions, or where I share their passions or goals? And I could reach out to them and say, what if we developed a partnership? And you could commission me, basically, engage with me in partnership to write poems about some of the things that are important to you. And that's what led to partnering with the Rodham Institute, focused on health inequality, something I care about, partnering with the amazing Wright Museum, of course, our African American Museum of History here in Detroit, and any number of their things that they're focused on. Obviously, Ovation TV or Shar Music, given my music background, right? So City of Ann Arbor, where I live. So there was a host of these things. And so I ended up developing a whole series of different poems that were part of these partnerships. So as I began to curate a collection, in drawing from them, I was like, so how in the end ultimately do I want to weave a story with this collection? And that led to this series of themes of inequality, of the Black experience, et cetera. And then I was like, you know what? There's always, almost like a musical performance, some poems that don't necessarily fit, but that I feel are important and are part of this story. And that led to encores.
Oh.
So, and especially Winter Mind, um, capturing a sense of wonder and potentially fear of what's to come.
Yes, I'm glad you talked a little bit about community, because this comes up for a lot of the writers that have been on Black Writers Read, and then an entry point into the commissions as your work as a poet in residence. Many of your poems in Chapter 3 on the Black experience were commissioned by the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, which is located in Detroit, my hometown. The poems are on important figures and historical moments within the African American experience, specifically citing back to the Civil Rights Movement, with titles like The Green Book and MLK Day, along with honoring how we've progressed as a country with the poem Obama. Can you talk about how your time as the poet in residence at the Wright Museum informed these poems, and why it is important that they speak to both a self journey and the collective experience?
Yeah. So first of all, right, it was just an honor to be able to partner with the museum, led by the extraordinary arts leader Neil Barclay, and so first and foremost, I was just honored. Obviously, I've been to the museum on so many countless occasions, and actually had performed there already my poetry and had done different things. Sphinx has had performances and partnerships there. So in many ways, the institution just had been for decades part of my life. And so to be able to engage in this kind of way was really an honor. And so as they were thinking about some of the commissions for me, right, some were very, if you will, pragmatic. In other words, the boy king, they were having a King Tut exhibit and they were like, write a poem about King Tut. They have, a wonderful exhibit that, and Still We Rise, that covers and charts the history of the African American experience all the way from Africa and coming up through and into Detroit and modern era, and to be able to try to capture that in a poem. And so some were really just reflecting exhibits that I immersed myself in. And then others, of course, related to key figures and or leaders, obviously MLK or Obama, and also trying to reflect them. And I would say with all of the poems, it's what I really want to try to do is to not just recount, which is what would just happen in journalism. This occurred. Africans were brought over on this date on this ship and experienced these things. But to try to illustrate that experience, to at least briefly put the reader and or the listener, if it's spoken word version, into an environment where they really feel whatever it is that is being depicted. So it was a lot of fun, but also some very serious kind of journeys into some of this history and experiences of Black people in our country, and that, of course, is not always pleasant because of some of the injustice. But even somehow I find through poetry a journey into injustice can be rewarding, which is very odd to think about, but it is. And I think that's one of the things about the power of art. When I was young and playing the violin and going through some rough stuff, somehow I could express myself on the violin, things that were horrible that I was going through, but expressed on the violin could become beautiful, at least temporarily.
Mhm. And for those who have been to Detroit but haven't been to the Wright Museum, please go. The way in which they curate the experience for you is beautiful. You walk into the atrium and then the rotunda. They have on the floor, and my apologies, I forgot his name. Brilliant muralist created this mural on the floor where it's all of the last names of the ships that were christened, which many of us as African Americans of African descent have those last names. Then the first exhibit you go into in Still We Rise, one of the first things you get is the immersive experience of what it would have been like in the bowels of one of those ships, and the moaning that you hear, and it's dark and it's like, it's just the way in which they create the immersive experience for you is so that you can really get a feel for what it would have been like at that time. And I'm so glad that you had an opportunity to really document a lot of the exhibits of the Wright Museum, because they've done some amazing, amazing, amazing things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's an extraordinary institution.
Yes. The poems of the poet journalist act as archives where you purposefully document and share stories of important folks in our history who may not be known to the general public and should be known. For example, there's a poem on Sanford Allen, who was the first Black musician to become a regular member of the New York Philharmonic, along with processes like the journey of a young person preparing for a career in music. And for those who don't know, because that was my previous life, the private lessons, go on the airlock, and all, like, just all the time that you spend immersing yourself both independently by yourself in the practice room with an instructor. It's a very intense process. So I love that you go into it here, because I think a lot of people don't know what the experience is like in terms of training to become a musician. What other stories have you chosen to share in this work to document within the literary canon, and then why these particular choices?
Yeah, well, there it really is a breadth, right? So of course through the arts, and I'm especially wanting to capture some aspects of music and either my history or experiences with music and or key musicians. Obviously, inequality. A number of those also come from my partnership with the Rodham Institute and capturing health inequality, which is just unbelievably stark. And so one of them, zip code, contemplating and understanding that just between two wards in DC, there's a 27-year life expectancy gap. And this isn't unique to DC. It's one of the most acute. But even here in Washtenaw County, the zip code where I used to live to the zip code that I live now has a 12-year life expectancy gap just by moving 20 minutes away. And what fuels that? So again, it's just this example. There really is a breadth of these stories, these, in a way, right, journalistic articles that you would otherwise read about the zip code, but hopefully through this medium, which is unique, I can have people not only be thinking about and understanding some of the factual aspects to someone or an issue, but really find themselves at the end of the poem feeling it, feeling the issue, experiencing it, almost living it. And then also certainly personal and sharing some experiences of love and the development of love for my wife, Afa,
Aw.
and kind of describing that and the birth of my eldest son, the coming, and that adventure, because it was, excuse me, 22 hours more plus, and experiences with my wife's father, um, who ultimately passed, and facing certain health scares, and talking about that in the poem, The Waiting Room, that experience that many of us have had, sitting, frightened, waiting for results or news or diagnoses, and or being surrounded by other people who have or are waiting as well. And again, sharing those realities of these experiences we have, and hopefully at least briefly immersing people and illustrating them in a way that uh, is helpful and or experiential in some way for the reader or listener. Because just this past week, my album, The Poetjournalist, dropped. That does not have all of the poems from the book, but does have some, and is curated a little bit differently. So people can check that out on my website as well.
Nice. Neglect, they said I wasn't really Black, and the arts. In these poems, you render your subject through the experiences as an outsider and being othered. I see a lot of this work citing back to your work as an arts leader and entrepreneur, where you've created opportunities and organizations to bring folks to tables where they once were not invited or were there but invisible. How does your experience with creating opportunities for marginalized communities inform your work even further? Because you talked a little bit about it um, earlier. As a poet journalist, I asked this question because I really appreciate how the subject in these poems are very self reflective and demonstrate how outsiders can serve as witnesses, similar to the work of Bearing Witness of James Baldwin, who his work for me is a Bible, accounting for experiences of needing to belong or to have a place too.
Yes. So my life as a social entrepreneur and especially my experiences in founding and leading Sphinx for almost 20 years, um, inform probably almost everything that I do. I think that I wear, people, Google Glass failed, right? Where there was, people had these glasses. I think I have, Sphinx glass or social entrepreneur glass. In other words, I think I think most likely everything that I see through the prism of those experiences. And I would say in twofold. And of course, this definitely all comes out in poetry that you find in the book, which is that on the one, it is this awareness, discovery, fight against inequality, against situations or realities where people were marginalized, prevented from having the same opportunities or access, and understanding those, experiencing them, dissecting them, interrogating them, trying to find solutions to address them, which is just has filled my life. And both the emotion and the intellect required in that process definitely fuels so much. But then equally, if not more so, informed by the relationships that were generated as a result of that work. People often talk about Sphinx, and especially anyone who's been part of the kind of Sphinx network knows and speaks of La Familia. And most people who've been through Sphinx, if people were to interview them and say, and this was captured in a documentary that was done, what was the most important thing? They don't say, oh, the prize money from the competition or the scholarship to this summer program or the access to this mentorship, or they say La Familia, the community, the family, the relationships. And so the same is extraordinarily true for me. Those relationships with people, some of who I knew from when they were very young and developed into, deep friendships, to also people who even just kind of remain acquaintances and or even professional colleagues. The breadth, the nature, the impact of those relationships, especially collectively for me, is overwhelming. It defines and has transformed the people who comprise the Sphinx diaspora. Have transformed my life, and so they reside in many of these poems and or are the inspiration for it.
Yeah. And I don't know if I ever told you this. This is going to go back like several decades. Because I worked, for those who didn't capture earlier. I did some work for the Sphinx competition in its early years. I remember like
Absolutely. You are, the audience should understand Nicole is La Familia. She is absolutely.
like I remember back in the day when you first started as a graduate student, pounding the pavement, asking folks for money, making the relationships with the University Musical Society. Like y'all, I was there in the early years. And so to see, because like y'all, it's been around now 25 plus years, and it's now under new leadership. Just like I teach, I'm about to throw you a bunch of flowers right now. So just get ready. So I currently, and I've been teaching arts management and like working with artists of color for some time. And also, and within my own arts leadership career, I cite the ways in which you led that organization from when we were working the competition, and it would be like 5 days of like 20 plus grueling hours, but it didn't feel grueling because of how you brought teams together. No matter how busy you were, or like the conversations you were a part of and the people that you talked with, you always made it a point to start off the day talking with the staff, running the competition, and ending the day. I remember there was one time we ended at like 12 a.m. talking with the staff to check in to see how the day goes. I am always now in my role with Enchanted Circle, which does art culturally responsive arts education. I'm one of the co-directors. I always make sure to bring folks together in those beautiful ways to actually hear and talk through the experience of doing the work. And then also I remember a conversation I had where I asked you this question, and this is another thing that I always cite with my students and also with my own arts leadership journey. I remember I asked you, I was just like, how does the Sphinx organization do such beautiful work, raise millions of dollars, give out all this money, and then put a lot of Black and Latinx musicians and orchestras putting them out front? And I asked you, like, how are you able to do all this work? And you're like, I'm not the expert of everything. I hire experts. I trust people with the work. So trust me, like, back then you were teaching future leaders, and I also have a copy of the Entrepreneurial Artist, which people need to get that book. So I'm so glad that your writing, even though your career has shifted, your writing still cites back to a lot of those beautiful moments, because arts leaders, oh my God, especially in theater, and that's a whole other conversation because regional theater right now needs that turn, because too much of that work is very hierarchical leadership. It's not about building community. It's not about building family. And so I just want to say thank you for laying that groundwork for me and my work today and in the future. So thank you. I was like, I have to find a way to put that in.
Thank you. Thank you. No, it's just I mean, obviously, right? Those experiences, they were just amazing, and everyone was. And and it makes me think of my poem Rise, which I specifically wrote for Sphinx. And again, trying to capture the that aspect of artists and how you end up developing those and also passing on. You can work to kind of be the founder or create something, but realizing that we're all temporary stewards of things, even things we create, and how you can the best way to honor that history and legacy is to support those who then take it forward beyond you. And there's a couple stanzas from that poem. I reference Afa, who of course has been the
Yeah.
longtime artistic director and president for the last 8 years of Sphinx. And I say in that poem, in the end, that I took a step and planted the seed to bring a permanency to this delicate discipline that defines our human condition. In the end, a movement constituted from ingredients of talent and noble ambition, for which my greatest contribution was merely its inception. Afa has taken Sphinx so far past its creation, and each of them so much more than I ever was, and yet I am so much more because of them. So I am filled with obligation grown from the virtuosi's devotion of practice and craft pursued with courage to take the stage that wasn't built for them, yet now they call their own. And so it's just, being able to have a life that's inspired by all of these extraordinary musicians and leaders is something that I'm extraordinarily grateful for.
Yeah. Which, hi, Afa.
She's what? She's watching. She should be watching. She should be watching. Maybe, I think.
I have two more questions for you before we wrap up this morning. How has your writing and literary voice shifted since your first book? For people who don't know, not only has he written poetry, and for the arts leadership sector, he's also written a memoir. How does your work, Poetjournalist, you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but how does your work as a poet journalist differ from that, from your memoir, from your early poetry, and also the book on the arts leadership sector? And then how do you wish for readers to engage with this work?
Yes, yes. Well, certainly from a personal standpoint, I encourage everyone to get all of my books. I should make a little collection thing with it. So one of the things I would say that's actually really interesting, right, is you would almost never see all of my books in a collection. In other words, because other than me as the author, um, they are very, very different. A science fiction novel, a children's book, a two poetry books, an entrepreneurship book that is utilized in a number of academic school programs, right? So they are very disparate in their nature. The Hopefully, so obviously there are the two poetry collections distanced by about 20 years. So my hope, I guess, is that the way in which I've utilized the medium has evolved. Certainly, I feel when I look back to my original or inaugural collection of poetry and versus Poetjournalist, that I see things that I'm doing with language, with meter, with asymmetrical rhyme, with different things that I wasn't doing back then. So for me, there is a complexity in the poet journalist that doesn't exist as much or isn't as prevalent in They Said I Wasn't Really Black. Um, so I hope that there is an evolution, and more than anything else, separate from, if you will, the craft of writing, is that I had 20 years of life experience. So many of the poems in Poet Journalist I just couldn't have written 20 years ago because I didn't have that experience. I didn't have that observance. I didn't go through whatever that challenge was, or be able to observe others, or have the relationships or experiences that both enabled me to understand or see a specific event or experience, or to be able to give something a context. So that 20 years of life enabled a context for me to take certain events and put them within the context of that. So, for example, if you're leaving your house for the very first time to go to a mailbox and get your mail, and you were to write a poem about that experience, and then you were to go out to your mailbox after 20 years of going out with fall and winter and snow and both an experience with an amazing dog and then a dog that might chase you, or seeing some unique animal or a unique weather event, or someone driving by, and all of a sudden you strike up a conversation. You have 20 years of those life experiences that have filled. You may write a poem that is still a walk to a mailbox, but it will be completely different for no other reason than the 20 years of life experience you've had that now give a context to it that didn't exist previously.
And then lastly, the last poem of the poet journalist, Winter Mine, ends with the line, "Is there another chapter for me?" This leads me to my last question of the hour. What is next for you, and how can the Black Writers Read community support you on this journey?
Yes, yes. And I think so. Context, I think, also will help for the audience for that kind of what I'm thinking of that. And so you'll be able to read the poem, but a person is in the midst of these contemplations of life and of loss, and loss of a loved one. And so what leads into that is a gaze at snow drifting slowly past the candles dripping with religion and belief in that which gives the strength to hold on to a life bereft of those who shared the memories that built it. A question lingers on the edge of sanity and loneliness. Is there another chapter for me? And in some ways, I was projecting out a fear that I have of being in a place and or projecting into people who I've had the honor to be able to know, who felt like they were in a place where you've lost most or all of the people that you shared a lifetime of experiences with. And what do you do? What is the next chapter in that? So in some ways, I was projecting something that, thankfully and very gratefully, I'm not experiencing yet, because I'm so grateful for love of amazing family and friends, La Familia. And so for me, the poem was both an expression for those who find themselves in those places, and especially those who are at an extreme maturity of their life journey. And or have experienced extreme loss, and also touching on the mental health impact of those experiences. But for me, and as I often and am thinking about these journeys, certainly I'm currently kind of in the journey of this collection, and now the album. What I love, I guess my best way to answer your question is, what I love is that if I look back in the entirety of my life, at any 5-year period, I could not have predicted what I would be doing 5 years from now. I would have been inaccurate. And of course, for many people, all I have to do is look to a year before the pandemic, and then would your life be the same, et cetera. So I find some solace in knowing that despite my best planning, my best efforts, strategy to work on different things, start a new project, do all of these things, I know I don't know what my next chapter will be in 5 years. And I find some solace and interest and curiosity in being on a journey to find out what that will be. With that said, certainly I love, and I will be continuing this journey with my students at Michigan, who I love and I learn from every semester, teaching arts leadership and entrepreneurship. I feel and I believe and I know that there is a next kind of chapter beyond this collection and this album for poet journalism, but I do not know what it will be or what form it will take. And so I'm just kind of now, I think, trying to gather the knowledge and experience from these to find out what will be the next plan for that. And obviously continuing, to be a part of the Sphinx, kind of story, and in a supportive role, continuing to just help and advise and support the amazing team that drives everything at Sphinx. And see what holds, and of course, most importantly, my 2 boys, and seeing how their lives evolve. Our eldest, who's on a journey of marketing at this point, youngest, who is experiencing their junior year of high school and seeing what their chapters will be. Both of whom deeply immersed in sports, which I was. And so they have pulled and drawn me into that. And so I look forward to moving forward on their sports journey as well. And of course, Afa's journey. So a whole lot to look forward to. The usual things to fear. I experience a lot of fear in my life. But also a lot of joyous anticipation.
Yeah, that's such a great way to close this morning. Thank you so much, Aaron, for making time to spend with us this morning to talk about your book, to talk about your career, and also to get caught up as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for everything that you do, Nicole. I am deeply honored to be able to call you a friend and colleague for so many years. And the work that you're doing, the people you impact, not only through the show, but through your teaching and education and leadership is absolutely wonderful. And looking forward to continuing our journey together as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm looking forward, as you said, influencing people. I'm trying to finish this dissertation. So I'm like, when I finish that in hopefully a couple of weeks, let's see what the journey of Dr. Nicole Young Martin holds.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yes, I'm going to do some wrap up here and then we'll close out. Thank you so much, Aaron. Have a great
Thank
afternoon.
you.
So, thank you so much for joining us for episode 2 of season 4, Black Writers Read. Be sure to check out our website at blackwritersread.com for past episodes and information on upcoming guests and events. Subscribe to my YouTube channel to keep up with episodes of both Black Writers Read and my other projects. Be sure to subscribe to the audio podcast, which we take the audio from the interviews and post it about a week or so later onto the podcast to make it accessible in different platforms. It is available on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcast. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us, and more importantly, for ensuring that Black authors continue to matter. See you soon.